Yeah, 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 yeah. Yo, that was a long yo. Welcome into another edition of the Men Who Cry podcast with the guy Just Rich. Thank you guys again for listening. Like, subscribe, review, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. If you're unable to do those things, it tells me that you are unable to open a door without using both hands. On today's episode, we are talking about big brands, big baller brands. Speaking of big baller brands, shout out to LeVar Ball. I know he had some health issues. He just had his leg amputated, below his knee. I don't remember which leg, but I hope he's doing better. You know, he was a very influential guy back in 2020, 2021, whatever. No, even before that, 2017. That's when Lonzo got drafted. So I hope he's doing well. It just came to mind just talking about the ballers and the brands. The first brand we're actually going to talk about is something that we've never talked about on this show, and we're talking about the Drake brand. The reason why is because it's on my mind, just because the music video for Nokia just dropped. So by the time everyone listens to this, you've probably at least seen the video or at least have heard that it's been out. The video is pretty cool, black and white video, whatever. It's a song that, interesting enough, I'm not great at picking the song that's going to stand out. This happens to me every single time. I love listening to rap music. I love listening to the entire album. I love listening to the entire album multiple times. It's always the thing that I always find funny is when people at 12:35 a.m. on Friday mornings, when the album comes out at 12 o'clock a.m. are already like, this is the worst or this is the best album I've ever heard in my life. And I just find it hilarious every single time because they clearly A, just didn't fucking listen to the album, or B, listen to 4 songs and they said, all right, I'm out and I'm just going to tweet this thing out and assume that people are going to respond to what I just said, which is a lie. So the album itself overall, I think it's mid, but I don't want to say it in the way that fans have now co-opted the word mid to think it's just terrible. I think it's okay. I think it's a good, fine project. I don't think it's great. Whatever. The song I thought was going to be the one that's jump off, and it's done pretty well, was Give Me a Hug, just because I feel like that had more of an earworm to it. But it seems like Nokia is going to be the song that's going to go number one, which more than likely it will at this point. The reason why he's in this topic, and honestly the reason why it was top of mind in my head for this moment, was just like people like big brands, man. It definitely took a dip down. I definitely do not believe. And also another thing too is people love riding waves. It's another big thing. And if we go back a year ago to when Kendrick first got on the Like That record with Future and Metro Boomin, that was really the first real moment of tension that I think most people finally saw. If you're a rap fan, this has kind of been a Cold War for years at this point. But that was the first, I would say, pen to paper on like he is absolutely dissing both Aubrey Graham and Jermaine Cole. And it's so funny because as the year progressed, you just saw how basically this man got dragged through the mud by, again, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm raising hands, by everyone that could imagine. And I remember at the end of it saying to like my friends or people around me, just being like, no, he'll recover from this. And people, like oftentimes they do on the internet, just scream and yell and say that, it's over. I'm never listening to a Drake album again or a Drake song again. And I'm like, okay, sure. Just the capping just never cease to amaze me. And the idea that he was done is like, no, you just gotta drop good music. We've had people, beat up women. We have people allegedly sexually assault children. We have people murder people, and their records sell after that. Kanye West is literally walking around in a KKK outfit, and people are still tuning into his streams, and people will listen to his album whenever that comes out, right? People are fake. It's fine. So I don't ever believe that there's anything that can truly kill anyone's career. I think the era, the idea of quote unquote cancel culture, that is long since gone. And unless you're doing something that I would argue is truly criminal, like you are going to jail, like an R. Kelly, a Tory Lanez, someone in that space, you'll be fine. Even those guys have released music while they've been incarcerated and have had some level of fan engagement since then. obviously it's not to the heights of what they were prior to their arrestments, to their arraignments, but they're still getting, we're having this conversation right now because people are still checking into their content. And the same thing works for Drake. He's had a moment in time where everyone kind of saw his chain get snatched, and now people who never cared about that stuff are right back into the club singing that song, which is I will say it's a very good song. It is definitely an earworm. It's still rattling around up there, and yeah, it's just an idea of just brands in general and how they work. Speaking of brands, and this is kind of the larger point of the topic, we were talking about bats, the turbo bats. For those who don't know or who aren't that tapped into baseball all the time, the season started. The season started a couple of weeks ago, technically in Tokyo, but the real season started this past weekend. Several games going on. Everybody's favorite team has played at least 3 games, probably 4 games at this point by the time you're listening to this. And the one thing that stood out for most people, and the big talking point I would say so far out of the baseball season in the first couple of games, has been these turbo bats. Now, if you don't know what a turbo bat is, apparently these are the bats where, if anyone knows a normal bat, the idea is that for some of it is, while the fat part of the bat would normally be at the very end of the bat, what some people have done is they've taken that, I guess, fat part and just slid it down a little bit to where it's in the middle part of the bat. So the bat now kind of goes small, thick, and then back down to being small again when you get down to the hand placement, to the barrel of the bat. And it looked interesting because the Yankees, 2 of their main guys have used it. I believe also Cody Bellinger had used it, at least this past weekend. And the Yankees just smacked home runs the entire weekend. They hit 9 in one game. Excuse me. I think the 2 main guys that have used it, Anthony Volpe and Jazz Chisholm, have hit home runs in 2 of their 3 games as well. And these aren't necessarily big-time home run hitters. Definitely not Volpe. Chisholm's a guy that could probably get you close to 20 on like a good year, but he's not considered a great power hitter either as well. And it got people talking. And I could pretty much compare the situation a lot of times really to this idea of branding and how things how things impact us in our minds. So I use this kind of analogy, right? Let's say you have to go get lumber, make it a fence in your house, right? You go up and you drive to your local shop and you ask for, the items that you need. The guy comes back to you, the person comes back to you and say, hey man, we're out. We don't really have anything for you today. You go, okay, cool. That's no big deal. You drive up, you leave, you drive up another maybe 5-10 minutes. Another shop. You go for the same things, you ask again, same hardware store. Guy comes back, tells you, man, we don't have anything. Now you're like, oh, wow, man, like it just seems to be a really bad time, right? You do this 3, 4, maybe 5 times, right? And by the time you get to the 5th store, you might realize, hey, man, this might be a bigger problem than just me. Why does no one around me, in terms of like the people who sell lumber, seem to have the items that I want, right? Then if you went to Lowe's and you walked in the store and you realize that they don't have any lumber, you don't need to go to other stores to know that there might be a lumber problem. Big brands tell us a lot about everything that goes around. That's what the Yankees are. The Yankees, the Dodgers, the Red Sox, the St. Louis Cardinals, the Cubs, definitely. Maybe the Mets, definitely the Braves. There are just very limited amount of brands that cross over to the national zeitgeist of the world, right? There were people in other places using the same bat. And apparently this bat was used a couple of years ago or whatever, or like maybe in spring training, but I guess didn't catch on. So the Yankees are the big microphone of Major League Baseball. When something wants to get out into the sports public, it is usually routed through the Yankees for it to be able to penetrate the minds and the understanding of regular sports fans who aren't tapped in all the time. This obviously isn't cheating. MLB already came out that said that this isn't illegal. that these bats have passed the required testing. To me, it just seems like it's fucking smart. I didn't know you could do this. And the idea that it got moved down to a different part of the bat, and it seems available to a bunch of other teams. I guess that Francisco Lindor, my favorite player on the Mets, has been using this bat this season. Not to any successful so far. I believe he's 0 of 11 to start, which, again, never changed Lindor. March, April, I just throw out every single time. He'll be lucky to bat under 200 by the end of the month. But it's basically the reason why the Yankees, in the way, exist how they are, right? We're the number one team in the number one market. Anything that passes around you kind of becomes this big talking point. And now we have these bats that seem kind of cool, because one thing is, people like when people hit home runs, you know, that seems fun and interesting, and it doesn't seem to really impede in any type of way to anyone else's ability to do so. Like, these aren't special made bats for the Yankees. Everyone has the ability to use these. But anytime you put the Yankees in any type of situation, these are kind of the things that kind of get brought across, right? Speaking of brands, again, also in the same brand kind of conversation, I didn't really give my thoughts to the Boston Celtics getting sold. I feel like this was mentioned maybe briefly on this podcast. I don't remember. Maybe my memory's just going at this point. But for those who don't know, the Boston Celtics were just sold in the last couple of weeks for a little over $6 billion. They were sold to a private equity company, just like what the Dodgers have going on with them. This is the largest sale for any pro basketball team in the league by a lot. The record before, the numbers before were just a little under 3 million. The Dallas Mavericks, depending, because I guess technically it wasn't overall a complete sale of the team, went for a little over $3 million. It's so funny because I remember back in 2014 when Donald Sterling, for anyone who doesn't know who Donald Sterling is, fun fact, he'd probably be pretty popular right now, which tells you how the world has vastly degenerated since 2014. But Donald Sterling was kicked out of the league for basically being a racist, and his team was sold. Now, I remember looking at the evaluation, or what the belief evaluation was going to be, and people kind of thought that the Clippers would go for around $500 million. That was kind of the price people thought, till Steve Ballmer came in and bought it for $2 billion, right? Now, a lot of things came into play, right? They didn't have their own stadium. They were basically playing underneath the Lakers, and it basically was they were paying rent virtually to be in the stadium. And it took Ballmer a while, but lo and behold, the Clippers got their own arena in Inglewood, and it seems to be doing really well. The Clippers have been a very odd team. I didn't think they would be anywhere near the playoffs, and it looks like, fingers crossed, they're going to be pretty locked into a playoff spot. We'll see what happens in the next couple of days of the regular season, but they seem to be on their way to, again, making the playoffs and having that money pay itself forward. I have to think that by this Intuit Dome and the amount of money from the Clippers games, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the hockey teams maybe makes a move over there. That's already another concert venue spot for artists, so it's just another place to make some more money. I wouldn't be surprised if Ballmer's able to get that investment back in the next couple of years. But this brings me over to the Celtics sale, which apparently did not include the arena, which, okay, that's a lot. And if you listen to any of the things that the previous owner has stated, basically the reason why it seemed like he was getting out of the business was because it was too expensive to keep the team together. The Celtics are way over the second apron. For those who don't know, the NBA now has hard caps, or a version of a hard cap. The second apron is the highest cap you can go. Once you go over that, there's significant penalties that happen to your team that we won't go all the way into, but just trust me when I say that it's very punitive, not only financially, but from a team building aspect. It's very hard to keep a team over the second apron for the whole time. What that means, you have to cut costs. And this is why, for a lot of people, this has basically kind of been looked at as like this version of what the Celtics are, this being their last season together, because that tax bill is going to be crazy. They're going to spend another year over the second apron. This will be their second year. You really don't want to spend consecutive seasons over the second apron. So it would be, do they cut? They're going to have to trade one of their big guys at some point in order to just to get below that apron. And the reason why that I feel like this didn't really move the needle in any kind of way outside if you're like a super sports fan is because Boston, I feel like, is a very interesting sports town, and I think the Celtics are a very interesting sports team, per se. The Celtics, you have to say, are either the best or second best franchise in NBA history. They have the most championships. I don't know off the top of my head if they have the most Hall of Famers, but I would have to think they're either first or second in that list. And they've had great players that I can name off going all around, all the way down. But I guess now the whole thing of things being like aura or the idea that the Celtics brand has always never really had that, it makes a lot of sense. It's the reason why they've never really gotten any high price free agent. The biggest free agents that they had, guys that they did not trade for, was probably either Gordon Hayward or Al Horford. That's it. You know, Kyrie came via trade. They drafted Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. They even traded for Derek White. They traded for Kristaps. Like, there hasn't really been a star or superstar player that has went to that team on his own. And I think a lot of times is when you look around the country, right? If you go to different states that either don't have a basketball team or their basketball team is relatively new, right? A lot of times they'll end up being Lakers fans. Why? It's because the Lakers have always had a star level player be there, right? There are people in the Kobe hive, Shaq hive, LeBron hive. Take it to like the Michael Jordan hive, Dwayne Wade hive, right? Those people are fans of those players and they play in that specific area that have never been to Miami, Chicago, Los Angeles. All people, because Celtics fans are everywhere, that are Celtics fans are Boston fans, okay? They love Boston, okay? They live in California, but they love Boston. They live in Texas, but they love Boston. They live in Florida, but they love Boston. I would go so far as saying, not every single person, but I would go as far as saying is that 98% of the people who are Jason Tatum fans are Celtics fans. Like, if Jason Tatum left the Celtics right now and went to, this is not a Luka Doncic situation where I feel like there were Luka fans and then there are Dallas Mavericks fans. And once Luka left to go to Lakers fans, there are people literally just saying, I guess I just root for the Lakers now, you know, because that's kind of how just the Lakers in general have operated forever. And the fact that Luka has that level of charisma and pizzazz to him, I've never felt that way about any Celtics player. It's always been about the Celtics, right? And I'm not even arguing that that's a bad thing or that's a way that, or something like that's wrong. It's more or less just saying that the culture or the identity of that team is really the makeup of the city. And at the end of the day, if you don't love the city, you tend to probably won't love the players on the team. There isn't anything, like I said before, wrong with that. It's just kind of what it is. So when you think about guys, we talk a lot of times about Jason Tatum, who's having an incredible season. I feel like that's not being talked about a lot. He has no chance of winning MVP, which I don't think that's right, per se. I think that he's had a season, especially when you look at it, and shout out to Austin Rivers, who has a great podcast that I'm trying to get more into. He made a really good point of saying how, okay, you have a great team. Everyone kind of recognizes that, right? Where you have guys that can be great shooters, great passers, great rebounders, great scorers. The fact that Tatum leads them in all of those categories should also tell you how great of a player he is, you know? And it's just the fact that I think he doesn't necessarily, I don't think he has a lot of like big finals moments games. He had a great game. The biggest game I would say of his career was probably that game 6 in Milwaukee against Giannis when Giannis had 40-something points and he also had like 48 points and they were down 3-2 and they got him back. Or the second big moment that I can think off the top of my head was 2 seasons ago when they played the Philadelphia 76ers. James Harden was on the team. They were down 3-2 going into Philadelphia. He was having a horrible game, and then he hit back-to-back. I think he hit 3 straight threes, and that helped them win the game when he was terrible the whole time. Those are things that I know as a fan and remembers, but at the end of the day, like, you got to do that stuff on the grand stage. And while he's been to the finals twice, you would argue he hasn't played well in the finals. It's a little bit of like a Steph Curry kind of thing. And until he has that moment, that kind of nail in the coffin of like, no, I'm one of the best players to ever play this game. And I don't think we think about Jason Tatum in that way. I think he'll always be kind of live in this weird space of like, great player, but not really jiving with people. So yeah, that's pretty much all we have for today. A little bit of a short episode for you guys, but again, I really appreciate everyone for listening, listening, reviewing. Speaking of calling in, I did a little Freudian slip because I can promote it now, even though we'll be going out a little bit later. What we want to do, or what we're trying to do here at the Men Who Cry Pod, is love to get some fan interaction, right? I kind of try to look at the list of people who are listening and promoting the content and subscribing, and I really appreciate every single person who's done it so far. It does really mean a lot to me. And one of the things that we want to do here is listen more to you guys. So we'll be sending out an email. We will have an email set up by the next time we record. I will have the email actually here for you guys to see and for you guys to write down and be able to involve with, because we will ask some questions, because we're going to do some AMAs, do some polling, things like that, just to get a better sense of what you guys out there want. So stay tuned for that. Like I said, that's going to be coming at the end of the week, on the last pod of the week, and it should be good. But thank you guys again for listening. We will hopefully have some of that call and stuff that I mentioned before and that little Freudian slip. But yeah, for me, this is the Men Who Cry podcast. Thank you guys again for listening, and do what you guys got to do. God bless. Have a good rest of your day.